Great. Thanks, Kate. My name's Kevin. I'm an alcoholic. I am coming to you from Potomac, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. I have a sobriety date of December 3rd, 2005, and I have a sponsor and I have sponsees, and I want to thank Kate for asking me to share tonight. Um, for all of the newcomers or people who are counting days, welcome. I got to tell you, this is the best deal in town. I've been around these rooms since 1995. I did relapse. I went on a 5-year run for a while, and it took me a while to get back. It took me 5 years to get back. Went out around 2000, and it took me about, about 5 years to get back. And I got to tell you, it, it was the hardest thing for me to get back into the rooms. It really was. But once I got back in and I stood up and said, "My name's Kevin, I'm an alcoholic, and I have 5 days," I felt so much better and I felt so much relief. So if you're counting days today, my wish based on my experience is that you keep coming back, because this, again, is the best deal in town. That's been my experience. So um, I, come from a long line of distinguished alcoholics, and probably some drug addicts, more pill poppers than drug addicts. But we have a nice line of alcoholics in my family on both sides, on my father and mother's side. My mother's side was a little bit more out there in terms of their alcoholism. My grandmother would drink 2 or 3 cases of beer, after she came home from work. And then she would end up getting into a fight with her husband on the front yard with chairs and knives and all of that. And then on my father's side, we had a bunch of alcoholics, but they tried to be a little bit more proper. It was always after, 5 o'clock. And it was always in the nice little martini glasses. And they tried to be as controlled as possible until, after the 20th martini, they weren't as controlled and it turned into a mess. So I was really primed and ready to go when I came out of the chute. And I grew up in a family that, didn't know how to deal with emotions, didn't know how to deal with anger, didn't know how to deal with anything. And the best way that they could deal with it is, one, my mom acted like a dry drunk and my dad just drank and had rage and screamed and yelled. And, I knew from an early age that I suffered from a learning disability, dyslexia and ADHD and a bunch of other things. And I knew I was also different. I knew I just didn't fit in with the regular kids. Uh, Part of that was my learning disability. Also, I knew I was gay. I knew I was gay from a really young age, and I tell you, it was challenging for me because I was called stupid. I was called, little fag. I was made fun of. There were a lot of things that just growing up just were building, the tension that kept growing. And, I had a dad who was extremely successful and who was very smart when it came to engineering and math. And I can't do math to save my life. So he would scream and yell at me after he had a couple of drinks and telling me how stupid I was and how, I would never amount to anything. And then I had this other side of me that knew I was gay and knew I was just like attracted to the other boys when we went to gym and stuff. And by the time I hit 14, maybe 15, I think it was closer to 15, boy, did I need a drink. I needed to drink like there was nobody's business. And I remember one day, my dad would always get these gifts from, his business associates. And there was a bottle of champagne in the liquor cabinet. And I was like, oh, this looks like it could be really nice. So I took it and opened it up, and it was a bottle of Dom Perignon.
Mm.
And I was just like, oh, this is really nice. It tastes really good. And then the buzz came. And then that little like bubbly feeling, it was just like, oh, wow, this is really good. I like the way this makes me feel. I really feel like better. I feel like I can actually conquer the world. Um, you know, and from that point, it was on. Um, I was really, really just drawn to the alcohol because you know what it did? It just gave me a sense of a break from being me. It gave me a break from that feeling of inadequacy, that feeling of being wrong, of being, you know, being gay was wrong because my mom was a fundamentalist born again Christian at that time. So that was not, having a gay son was not in the cards at all. And then feeling as though I was stupid, and then taking that sip of alcohol, I felt so much better. All the world seemed to melt away, and I felt like everything was going to be okay. And you know, for quite some time, I drank and used. I drank really regularly, but I was also cautious because I do remember my grandparents and how they drank and how, you know, obnoxious they got and how unmanageable it got. And I was like, I didn't want to be like that. I didn't want to engage in that type of drinking. So I always sort of kept it, particularly when I was living with my family, I sort of kept it in check. I didn't go too wild. And then I went away to college, and the wheels just came off at that point. They just came off. It was like, I remember waking up underneath a Jeep Wagoneer or a Jeep something, and I'm staring up. I'm like, where in the hell am I? I crawled underneath this Jeep and I passed out, and I'm looking up, and I'm like, I'm under a car. And I don't remember how I got there, what happened. All I know is that my shirt was gone. My shoes were gone. I had jeans on and I'm underneath the car. And I'm like, I'm not a mechanic. I had no idea what the hell I'm doing. Um, that's the type of insanity that my drinking started to get me involved in. That's the type of stuff that would happen. I would black out, and then all of a sudden I'm racing down. I went to school for a bit in Boston, racing down a street in Boston, you know, in the middle of winter in socks and a tank top, crying. That type of like, well, what the fuck just happened? And excuse my language. And it just kept getting worse. And I did a geographic. I decided, let's leave Boston, let's go to Los Angeles. And so I figured Los Angeles, oh, it's a whole different, you know, it's a whole different ball of wax. And when I got out there, I was introduced to some drugs, and I got into some crystal meth. And I have to tell you, that made drinking a heck of a lot better. I was able to drink when I did those drugs like there was nobody's business. I could drink you underneath the table as long as I was able to continue to do the drugs. I am so grateful for the crystal meth, because what happened for that, it brought my drinking to a head, and it brought me into these rooms a hell of a lot faster. Because my life was out of control and unmanageable when I was just drinking. And then it was like way, way out of control, way unmanageable. I could not, I was living in my car. I was homeless. My dog and I were sharing the car. And then what would happen at night is, like, I would park my car at UCLA, and then I knew about this room that I could, you know, sneak into. So my dog and I would sneak into this room, and we would sleep there during the night. I'd have bottles hidden throughout this little storage room where we were spending our time. Um, and it was just a mess. And I remember this one time I was out there, I had been drinking and using, and I was out cruising around looking, you know, looking to hook up. And I met this guy, and we went back to his place, and I'm like, oh, do you want to do this? Do you want to drink? Do you want to? He goes, no, I'm sober. And that was like a totally foreign concept to me. How can you go ahead and hook up and not drink, not use, not have, you know, not use poppers, whatever it might be. I was just like, this is weird. We had a really great time, and I was drawn to this person. I was like, the sobriety just intrigued me because my life at that point was completely collapsing. And I remember about 4 weeks later, we got together again, and I was like, "Oh, so what are we going to do?" I was like, "I thought we were going to hook up." And he's like, "Oh, let's go this. Why don't we go for a walk down the street?" And he took me to my first AA meeting, which was at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles on a Saturday night. And I was with that guy for 12 and a half years. It was a great experience. I got sober. I was introduced to the rooms, and I learned a hell of a lot. I learned a lot about my addiction. I learned a lot about sobriety. I learned a lot about my motivations. Um, but I got sober and stayed sober for that guy, that person. I never decided to make the switch and say, oh, okay, I'm going to go ahead and stay sober for me because I need this. I want this. I was in my addiction. I was in my um, running on fear that if I didn't stay sober, this guy who came in and rescued me would end up leaving me. For me, that didn't work. It wasn't the best solution. And, it was very interesting, sort of built into this thing after 5 years together. I remember I was out with, I don't know what I was doing, but I was not working the program. I was not showing up at meetings on a regular basis. In Los Angeles, they give cakes for meetings. I think I showed up right towards the end of that sobriety, and I was doing inhalants at the time, and I rationalized my sobriety because I hadn't drank yet. I was just doing inhalants and drugs. So guess what? I was still sober. I call it AA a la carte. And I'd show up and take a cake, and I had all these popper burns all around my nose. And I'm sitting there, I'm sober 5 some odd years, and look how amazing my life is, and trying to convince myself more than anybody else out there at the meeting, because anybody in the meeting would look at me and go, she crazy. She needs prayer, not well at all. And at that point, I knew I wasn't sober. I wasn't spiritually, mentally, emotionally sober. And I decided, well, hell, I've already stepped out. I might as well go full throttle. And that's what I did. I spent 5 years using drugs. I didn't pick up a drink or any alcohol at all. In fact, I was over at some guy's house, and he goes, "Oh, do you want a beer?" And I said, "Oh, no, I can't. Alcoholism runs in my family, but I'll do another line of Crystal, please." That's the insanity that my thinking, the alcoholic thinking, brought me. And then there was this one time, and I was still together with the guy that brought me in the room, and he finally called me out on it. And there was this time, and he said, what's going on? Are you using? And I remember at that very moment, this is somebody that I profess to love. This is somebody that I said I cared about and was important to me. And I looked at his eyes, and there was such pain, there was such hurt, there was such anger, and it was caused by my actions. And at that moment, I realized, this is not right. What am I doing? I was so selfish, so self-centered, so obsessed with getting high and taking care of my own addiction and my alcoholism and stuff that I completely neglected what I was doing to this person who I profess to love. And I went back into rehab. Never been to rehab before. It was, I freely admit that I went in to save the relationship. But once I got into rehab, which by the way was absolutely horrible, I would not do rehab again. Part of the reason I stay sober, I think, on the really rough days. But when I got there, I realized I need to do this for myself. I need to make sure that I can be a member of society, that I can look, my partner in the eye with at least some dignity and some respect and some truthfulness. I can look my family and I can look my friends in the eye and say, okay, I'm sober today. I'm working a program. It was a really, really great and horrible experience getting sober again. I was terrified about coming back into the AA rooms. I was embarrassed about standing up and saying, my name's Kevin, I have 10 days or 5 days, from people that have been in the room that we came in around the same time. And, you know, I struggled. My ego was so big that, you know, I couldn't get over myself. And eventually, as I mentioned earlier, I got up and I said, my name's Kevin, I'm an alcoholic, I have 10 days, or whatever it was. And I felt a sigh of relief. And I started to take this program seriously. I started to work the steps. I started to surrender. I got out of the way. And what I realized is that this disease is selfish and self-centered to the core. I am selfish and self-centered to the core. When I am left, when I don't work a spiritual program, when I am not connected with my higher power or my fellows in the program, my first instinct is, what's in it for Kevin? What can I get out of it? The world revolves around me. It is all about Kevin. And quite frankly, that's a recipe for absolute disaster for me. It does not work. And I spent a year really focusing in on building a program, working with the sponsor, working the steps, being of service. And after celebrating a year, the guy I had been with for 12 and a half years, who actually brought me into my first meeting, turned to me one morning and said, would you pass the cream? I want to end the relationship. And just out of the blue. And right after a year of sobriety again, you know, I want to end the relationship. I'm moving out tomorrow. And I'm like, whoa. So I went a little crazy. I just went, seriously, it was like, get the net and get the straitjacket and carry Kevin away. I didn't pick up and I didn't drink, but I was crazy. And that brought me to a whole different level of spiritual acceptance or spiritual connection, a surrender that I had never done before in my first sobriety or in the first year. It took me to the point where I actually had to go ahead and humble myself and say, hey, I am incapable of managing this breakup on my own. I had to ask for help. I did some crazy things and I still have to make amends for them. Like, I was so nuts. I backed into his car with my truck. I keyed his car. I did all of these things that were just like insane. Though I didn't drink I didn't drink. I did not drink. I stayed sober, but I did these insane things. And, you know, looking back on it now, looking back on how hard that was for me and how much it devastated me at that time, I have to say it was the best thing that could have happened to me on a spiritual and emotional level that he left me, because I had that opportunity to learn who I was as a sober man and get to know what my values and what my morals are and what I believe in and how I can be of service to my fellows and to my higher power. And it was a hell of a journey, I have to tell you. And, you know, what happened once I got through that breakup and, you know, I grew more than I ever thought I would. And I fell in love with this program for me. I wanted to be a part of this program because, you know what? I wanted to be sober. I wanted to make sure that I can actually look somebody in the eye and say, you know, my name's Kevin. This is what I did. I apologize for this, or whatever it might, whether it's making amends, whether it's being there for somebody. I just wanted to be a sober man, and I wanted to be able to look at myself in the mirror and say, you know what, you're doing the best you can today, and you're going to be okay. I was tired of the drama. I was tired of creating more problems for myself, tired of having to make amends. And the important thing I learned out of this is that I wanted to be sober. I loved this program and I worked the steps. I clung to the fellowship and my life got progressively better. And I've done a lot of things in sobriety. Some of them were really stupid. And I'm like, you know what I did with my ex. I still need to, well, he died. So I mean, he told me not to contact him ever again. He said, I don't want to have anything to do with you, and justifiably so. And I have an amends to make, and I was getting ready to make an amends to him, and I found out he died of a heart attack. So um, I'm trying to figure out I'm working with my sponsor now, trying to figure out how to make an appropriate amends there. But back to what has happened in sobriety, from the breakup to lost my business in 2008. I had a landscaping business. I had to pack up and move cross country back to Washington, D.C. My parents had to help me out and get settled. But, I went back to school. I got a master's degree. I ended up working on a political campaign in 2012. I got hired after volunteering on the campaign. They hired me when the guy won, and I was promoted to a management level position. I actually decided to run for public office myself. I lost. I've gotten into relationships, and I've ended relationships without backing into their car or keying their car. There's progress here. And I was also able to find a level of serenity by working the steps, and an ability to turn it over to a power greater than myself, to practice step 3 on a regular basis, to make sure I practice step 1 on a daily basis. It was all of those things that those experiences gave me that brought me to the points in my life that we're facing. Running for office was the scariest thing I've ever done. I had to knock on doors. I had to ask people for money. I ran as an openly gay, openly HIV positive person who is in recovery, and who is, was in recovery for, I think, 13 years or however long it was at that time. I didn't hide anything. I put myself out there. I lost. I got depressed. But you know what? I didn't drink. I didn't use. And I grew from it. And then COVID hit. And I got to tell you, this last 6-7 months has been absolutely brutal. Because I was already depressed from, losing the election, and then my boss decided to run for president, because I guess that's what a member of Congress does, just run for president. And so my job ended, and so I didn't have a full-time job. I had lost an election, and I was depressed, and then this disease comes along that you have to isolate, and it was a recipe for disaster. And it has been a challenge, quite frankly, and I fell into the depression. I fell into that oh, poor me. I just really embraced the self-pity. And then I had somebody come along and kick me out of that and said, you know what, that's not getting you anywhere. Where is it getting you? And then that's sort of when I sort of got out of my doldrums, and I started working again on a program. I started journaling every day. I started reading page 86 and 87 in the big book. I read a daily reflections. I said the 11-step prayer. I, went back and started meditating for 5 to 7 minutes. I started picking up the phone and calling people and saying, hey, this is Kevin. I just wanted to see how you're doing. What's going on? Get out of myself, get out of my own thinking, and find out how somebody else is doing. And be genuinely interested and concerned about their well-being and their welfare. I went back to basics in the program. What my sponsor taught me when I got back into the rooms back in 2005. Get out of the way. And that's what I did. And you know what? I started to feel better when I did that. Being of service, getting out of your head, and actually doing something for somebody else, for me, has been the best way to cope with these challenging times. I'm actually almost out of time here. So I have learned a lot from these rooms. I have learned a lot from everybody that has, come before me. I've learned from the people that have showed up that have actually not made it. I had several friends that have died of this disease. And I realized that, what I got today. and that's it. Um, and if I just put other people ahead of my own selfishness and self-centeredness, and I don't pick up a drink or a drug, anything's possible. Anything is possible, even in COVID, even in this political environment. I have realized that if I just don't collapse into that fear, that self-pity, and I trust in my higher power to make sure that I take the next right step, however it turns out, it's going to be okay. Um, this is a hard time. I do wish everybody the absolute best, and to reach out to your friends and your support network and realize you're not the only one going through this. Everybody's going through this. There are days when I just want to curl up in bed and cry, and I don't now. I get up and I do what I can. These Zoom meetings have been a godsend, but I do miss the in-person connection and fellowship. But this is where we are. This is where I am. This is where the country is. This is where we are. So I've learned how to adapt and adjust. It's challenging, but again, if I don't pick up a drink or a drug, I'll be okay. Again, I want to congratulate everybody who is celebrating. That is incredible. And particularly everybody who's coming in and counting days. Please keep coming back. This is the best deal in town. And, you know, you don't have to go out and go through the hell that I went through. You take my word for it. Just keep coming back. So thank you for letting me share. Thank you, Kate, for asking me.